thanks for joining. For those of you that have been on my KVAs or my presentations before, thank you for coming back. I'm not sure why you enjoy suffering like this, but today we're going to go over life cycles inside of Vault Workgroup and Vault Professional. So go ahead and give me a few more minutes here to get some more people in, but we'll go over what they are, how you can configure them, what kind of settings you have to go through that. As always, if you have any questions throughout the presentation, go ahead and add them in the chat. I'll go ahead and address them when there's some time, or if it fits with the topic that we're moving into. But I'm gonna go ahead and disappear now. But like I mentioned, today we're gonna go over life cycles. We're gonna go over a quick overview as to what they are, how they work with categories inside of Vault, the states that you can set up for them, and then the transitions themselves. So what are the settings that you can do or have for the going between those states and how that goes. And at the end, if there's any questions left over that weren't answered during the presentation, I'll go ahead and go over those. That's me. Picture looks a lot better than that webcam did. I'm a Vault application here at KETIV. I've been with KETIV for about 5 years cumulatively. I had a year of R&D experience before that, and then a year of manufacturing experience with one of our customers. So, trying to get different experiences here to all with Vault in a way, except for R&D. R&D was a separate application, but kind of trying to learn more about Vault and the different ways that it gets used. Before we go there, I'm going to put up a poll if you guys want to go ahead and answer that for me. First question is, what version of Vault are you currently on, basic, workgroup, or professional? Kind of to get a feel of my audience today. Today's mostly geared, or specifically geared towards workgroup and professional. The last Vault AVA that we had was done by Emery Wiley, who did a setup of Vault Basic. So I kind of wanted to build on that. He went over the general usage of Vault and setup. I wanted to expand on its uses there and kind of go from there. And then the second poll there is, what year of Vault are you going on? That one's less, I guess, less impactful, but as Vault has progressed throughout the years, there's certain uses or certain tools that have been added to it that were asked over the years as well. And we'll go over that as well. So looks like we got a pretty good response here. I'm going to go ahead and end the poll. I'm going to go ahead and share the results as well. It looks like a little over, or I guess a little over half of you are on professional. There's some of you here on basic, and that shouldn't discourage you from staying throughout the presentation here. If you guys do want to know, oh yeah, I guess I did forget one option here. None of the above in the poll. If you're not on Vault yet, or if you're looking to kind of migrate to Vault, that is an option as well. But like I said, this functionality and process that we're going to go through today, maybe that's one of the things that you need a little bit more elaboration on or explanation on to get you to move to Vault. So it could be one of those things. I'm going to go ahead and close that out of here and move forward. So overview of life cycles. They're in Vault Workgroup and Professional. They're a flexible way to configure your engineering workflow in Vault. And by flexible, I mean we can tailor it. It can be tailored to match your engineering workflow. That's one of the things we do during our Vault deployments or Vault implementations. Is we get together with the engineering teams, whether it be one site or multiple sites, to kind of get everyone together and get the process mapped out. Once we get that process mapped out, you can build it inside of Vault and create those states that you need. It has built-in stage gates. So what I mean by that is you can set up certain criteria before it can move forward in the engineering process, whether it be certain types of information, certain different states that it needs to go through. That can all be set up with life cycles. You can add automatic processes in here, which, if you need a PDF every time a drawing gets released, you can use Vault Professional to kind of get that going for you through Lifecycles. And then revision control. With Lifecycles, you're able to keep track of your revisions inside of Vault and kind of automatically push those through as you go. So typically, you kind of go through the different topics and then go into a demo of how it all fits together. I do it a little differently, and we're going to go straight into the demo and then kind of talk about the parts as we go. So the first part we're going to talk about is categories. So you can have different workflows for different file types inside of Vault with Lifecycles, and how that does that is with categories inside of Vault. And typically, you could have CAM files, you could have your inventor files, you can have AutoCAD electrical files. There can be different rules set up inside of Vault to kind of capture those different file types and put them into a specific category. Once it goes into that category, you can default what life cycle it goes to or what workflow it needs to follow. You can also default the properties that go for each category. If you want to have a workflow for your sheet metal parts, and the thickness is one of the important properties that you need for sheet metal. Well, that might not be the same thing for when you're doing a CNC part or something along those lines. Thickness doesn't really matter. You can set thickness to be defaulted only for your sheet metal category. And you can also keep different revision types based on your category as well. So let's jump into Vault and we can see how that looks. So the configuration is inside of Tools, Administration, and under Vault Settings. For those of you that are familiar with Vault settings themselves, these settings apply particularly to the Vault that you're logged into. So, mine is very creatively named Vault. So any settings that you're changing in here only apply to this one. The other option that you have are global settings. So this right here, and that means any Vault created inside of the one server, the one environment, these permissions would apply to all of those Vaults created. But Lifecycles are specific to the Vault that you're creating them. And most of the things we're going to be looking at today are under this Behaviors tab. So you'll see Lifecycles, revisions, categories, rules. So we'll go into categories just to go over that. And you'll see that there's categories for files, folders, items, custom objects. We're going to go with file category today. And the default one in there is base. And the reason that it does this as a default is if a file doesn't match any of the rules that you've put in place, you want to make sure that it doesn't add any permissions to it automatically, that it doesn't inhibit anybody from seeing files that that they should be able to see. So by definition, base doesn't put it into any life cycle, so it kind of leaves it out in the open. The other categories we have in here are engineering and office kind of thing. You can set different rules to place them into these categories specifically. And those rules are completely up to you. The way that I did it, and I'll show you in a little bit, is for my engineering category, I made it so that it's looking for certain file extensions, whether it be assembly, so IAMs, IPTs. You can give it as long of a list of criteria that you want. But these categories, like I mentioned, you can apply certain life cycles to it by default. So this one will automatically go into this flexible release process when it gets put into this engineering category. That means, it'll automatically be in a work in progress state. It'll automatically be in this life cycle right off the bat when it goes into the category. We can also give it different types of revisions that you want. This one, for my engineering data, I only want it to be alphabetic. In some cases, we have customers that, data might start off in numeric during pre-release. As they're working on it, it goes through its numeric revisions. And then once it goes into release, maybe then it goes into an alphabetic format. So you can assign different revision schemes to your categories and kind of switch back and forth into them, but also limit if you want the ones that are used. And like I mentioned, properties. So these here are the properties that are associated with the engineering category. And for design representations, the list is much smaller. You don't have as many engineering properties that are needed here, just because they're not really engineering files. So you can pick and choose which properties are associated to each category. But once you have your category set up to behave the way that you want it to treat your files, you have to figure out a way to get these files into those categories. So that's where rules come into play. So I have some, pretty standard rules here, or pretty short rules here. Design representation is actually one of the standard ones that comes in here. So whenever a file comes in with the classification of design representation, so whether it be PDF or a DWIF file, it'll come in with that classification and place it in that category automatically. The ones that I created, though, are parts, IAM, and drawing. So this is just a pretty quick setup on my Vault to get those going. But the criteria that I picked here is file extension. So if an IPT comes in, an IAM comes in, or an engineering drawing comes in, an IDW, it'll automatically place it into this engineering category. The way that the rules work is you can create a new rule. So like, let's say we want to process DWGs as well. We give our rule a name, and we tell it what category we want it to go into. So DWGs into engineering, and then you would give it a criteria. So in this case, we would go to file extension and say it contains DWG. Then we would add this. Something to keep in mind here, similar to the searching feature inside, or the find feature inside of Vault, this is all cumulative. So instead of adding multiple criteria as an or, so it won't look, if I say file extension DWG, file extension IDW, and add this won't act as an or, which means it won't find DWGs and or IDWs. It'll try to find a file that is a DWG and an IDW. So in this case, it would never find anything that would match this criteria. So just keep that in mind. You can be very specific with the files that are going into a category. Just don't go too far to the point where it won't add anything to your category. And with the list of rules, the way that it processes these things is it actually goes from top to bottom. So it'll go through, figure out if it's a design representation, an IPT, IDW, pretty much all the way down. And if it doesn't match any of the rules that you created above, it'll end up in base, which is just the default one. It says, hey, doesn't match any of the rules that you've created. It's just going to automatically go into base. So that's categories, rules. We went over most of that there. We actually have a question that came in. After you've created assigned rules, does it automatically run the rule throughout the Vault? It does not, unfortunately. Those rules are on creation or on Vault creation whenever they get uploaded. So anything that that had already been uploaded won't automatically go into those categories. A quick way to actually do something like that is you could run your own kind of search or rule in this case. So like, let's say, if we search for files with a file extension of IPT, add, and then what you can also add is category name does not contain engineering. Now add this as well. So now it'll find any IPTs that are not in engineering already. So that'll help you kind of figure out what has been processed and what hasn't been processed. In this case, those rules were in there from the creation of my Vault. So everything that matches that criteria is already in there. But this could help you create a search. You can always save this and say, IPTs to process, save it as a folder, and then if you come in here, it'll show you the list of files that you have, and you can manually change the category, place them into that engineering one that you created. So let's go back here. That's categories. And again, this is going to be a pretty high level overview of Lifecycles, and pretty fast, just to make sure that we don't go over our time limit. But it is a very, very robust tool. It matches your workflow. So if you have any questions or any other interests on it, just feel free to reach out. States. So each step of your engineering process, like I mentioned, we map it out with our customers. Whenever we do a Vault implementation, we make sure that, we say, hey, who touches which different groups touch your data at what point? What do they need to do? Is it editable? Who can see it? So we create these states inside of Vault to match those different steps in your process. And each state will apply different types of permissions, whether a person can see it, whether a person can edit it, delete it, or in the newer versions, that's one of I guess one of the newer things in the newer versions is whether a person can download these files. And you can also mark certain states as released or obsolete. So let's go back into Vault and take a look at what that looks like. Again, we are going to administration, Vault settings, behaviors, and in this case, we're going into Lifecycles. So let's take a look at the flexible release process that we were looking at. Keep in mind also that these Lifecycles can apply to files, and they can apply to items depending on the version that you're in. So if you have items and you're working with items, you would have access to item release processes. But in this case, we're working with files, so we're going to take a look at that. So if we go ahead and edit this, it'll bring up a window, and it'll tell us the different states that we have available. So, work in progress, review, released. A lot of the times we have a quick change state for clerical errors after they're released. You don't want to bump the revision, but you still need to make an edit to the title block. There's a typo, there's a missing numbers, things like that. Quick change is very helpful for that. And then obsolete, when a file or when a part can no longer be purchased or should no longer be manufactured, we can always obsolete files. But seeing these states here is kind of hard to envision how they work together. So typically what we do is we map it out in a workflow like this. This is our template that we use, kind of matches what the Vault has configured already, as well as the different transitions that can happen. So, start and work in progress for review here, released, quick change, and obsolete. These are all the states that are there. You can pick and choose the different transitions. So, if you want to go from work in progress to in review, but it can't go back directly, very rarely is that the case. You can dictate whether that happens. This transition from work in progress to released, sometimes that doesn't need to happen, or it doesn't need to be available. You can pick all of these different transitions. What we end up doing with our customers is mapping these out, showing them, hey, this is the process that comes out of the box. How do we, does it match your workflow? What other states do we need? Who's in these groups and what are their permissions? So you'll see here, we have a Vault admin, Power CAD users, things like that. And we'll map out whether they should have read, modify, delete, or download permissions. Kind of helps us, give us a roadmap, say, all right, this is your process. We have it mapped out in Mural, in this case, this application that we use. Let's go ahead and create that inside of Vault. So we come in here, we make sure that we create the states. Within each state, you have different tabs for it. So transitions, those are when it's in quick change, where can it go? Can it go into work in progress? Typically, the answer for that is no. So for that specific transition, you can come in here and actually limit that transition ever happening. So this one specifically, quick change to work in progress, you can deny for everyone. That means nobody will even have the option to send it back into work in progress. That's something you don't want. Same thing for a review. security here says deny. So you can, like I mentioned, it's very flexible. You can pick and choose the transitions that you want. On the second half here is the opposite. So you'll notice the arrows going the other way. We also don't want it to go from work in progress to quick change. So that one would also be denied here. What's nice is these settings for work in progress to quick change are actually in the work in progress state as well. So in this case, if we look at work in progress to quick change here, the settings should be the same, which means security is also denied. But for these states, in each specific state, you can pick and choose what permissions are applied. So work in progress is the most open state, so everyone's allowed to read, modify, delete, and download. If there are specific groups that you want to limit that delete permission, you can always add specific groups here or add specific users. So if Eric is always a troublemaker, I don't want him to be able to delete. I can specifically deny him that permission. Something to keep in mind here, denies are very explicit. So what I mean by that is, let's say it was the opposite and I really trusted Eric. I knew he would be the one in charge of deleting files if we needed it to. If I go in here and I say everyone is denied delete permissions, even though Eric specifically is allowed to delete, what it'll check to see is Eric part of any groups that are denied? It'll see that he's part of everyone and it'll deny Eric that permission. So just keep that in mind. Be wary of explicit denies. They'll go ahead and cause some issues that you're not expecting. If you, the other way that you would set this up is you would give everyone a blank kind of option here for delete. And what that does is it, when it goes to check for Eric, it'll check the everyone group and it'll see, well, everyone group doesn't have the permission to delete, but it also isn't being denied. So then it'll check Eric's profile itself, and then it'll say, well, Eric himself has that permission, so let's go ahead and allow him to do it. So just keep that in mind. Explicit denies are very, very explicit. They'll go ahead and stop you in your tracks. But you would go through this process pretty much for each state, make sure that certain, the necessary people have those permissions. Again, you would go through that during this mapping out process and making sure that you're capturing those permissions there. Specifically for released and obsolete, there's another option in here for control. And these two here, when a state is marked release, it adds more protection to it. So it's a controlled version. So that means whenever a file gets released, you want to make sure that you have history of it at all times. Like you don't want it to be able to be deleted, purged, anything like that. So for release state, it's a control version and you keep all of the release. Every time it goes into release, you're going to keep it. And I believe the same thing, first and last for obsolete. So what that means is if there's multiple edits of the file in this obsolete state, what it'll do is it'll keep the first obsolete version of this file as well as the last one. Anything in between is up to fair game. It doesn't have to purge it. But if someone were to request, hey, let's go ahead and get rid of some of these versions, it would be able to get rid of those versions in between. Think of it like a sandwich. It'll keep the two bread pieces, but it'll get rid of any of the filling. But again, mapping out your states, mapping out which groups can touch which files at certain stages during your engineering process is crucial in setting up life cycles. And then we have transitions. So we started talking a little bit about transitions when I jumped into that tab, but you can dictate who can move files from state to state or items. You can create PDFs on certain transitions. So whenever, like I mentioned, whenever it gets released, you can create PDFs. Orphan states, be wary of orphan states. So when you're making changes to your life cycle states, make sure that if you're going to delete a state or if you're going to delete certain transitions, or certain states that connect to those to files like that. Make sure that your files can get out of those states. So sometimes you can leave a file like in, you're testing out a shop state, like say for shop review, things like that. And then eventually you're like, well, we don't need this state anymore. We found a different workaround. So we're going to go ahead and remove any transitions to it. Well, at that point, if you have any files that are already in that state, it won't be able to kind of transition out. So you want to make sure that you search for files in that state, get them to the state that they belong to, and then make any changes to your lifecycle. You can also add, there's certain settings that'll ensure your children are released before the parent. So this applies for assemblies. If you're releasing an assembly and some of the parts below it aren't released yet, you can always release them all at the same time and it'll allow you to do that. But if you're trying to release just the assembly and it sees, something still being worked on, it'll actually stop you from doing that. Ensure no files are obsolete. That's another check that it does. If something is trying to be released with an obsolete file, as part of it, it'll stop you and it'll give you a warning message and then automatically revise your files. So an example of that would be in our template, whenever something goes from release to work in progress, we want to bump the revision. We want to make sure that it goes up to the next revision while it's being worked on. So you can do that through Lifecycles. So all of this will happen inside of transition. So the one that we're going to look at first is released. So some of the criteria that we talked about is, or stage gates earlier, is certain properties. Like if you need certain properties to be filled out whenever it's released, you can add that criteria here. What you would do is actually it's under property compliance. So that means property compliance is compliant. You can add this as criteria for certain transitions. And what that does is if a category is requiring certain properties to be filled out, if those properties are empty or if it doesn't have a value that matches properly, it'll mark the file as non-compliant. It'll say, hey, this file is missing certain information. And this, when you're doing the lifecycle transitions, it'll check that. And if it doesn't match, it'll say, hey, you're missing properties or it doesn't match the criteria that was set for it. So you can usually do that by category, or if you want to get more granular, you can add it in the specific transition here. You can add any properties and then, add the criteria itself, the condition. I'm going to go ahead and remove this here. Under actions, so, here you'll see the different things that can happen on this transition. The popular one here, because we're going from review into released, we want to go ahead and make sure that we're generating a PDF. So, synchronize properties, make sure that everything's up to date. Update the view, which is that preview that you can see inside of Vault under the view tab, and then a different combination of those two. The one that I typically use is synchronize the properties, update the view, and create a PDF. It'll do all three. It'll send a job to your job processor and kind of have it do it in the background. This is also where you would add the checks. So check if dependent files are released. It'll check to make sure that everything is being released at the same time or has been released in the past. And then the one at the bottom, I believe here, check that children are not obsolete. So this one's not enabled automatically, but you can always turn this on if need be. You want to make sure that things aren't being released with obsolete parts. And even if they can be, you want to make sure that you're aware of it while pushing things through. I know in a lot of cases, assemblies are very large. So it's kind of impossible or very hard to kind of scroll through that list and see an obsolete if it's only one part and things like that. So this will help you kind of catch those ahead of time. Custom job types. This is typically, for those of you that have used Lifecycles in the past or are familiar with Cool Orange and Power Jobs, there's certain jobs that you can create in Power Jobs and, as custom jobs as well, that you would run on certain transitions. You can add those here. So that means whenever this transition happens, it'll trigger that job to run, you would just add it in this list here, give it the name that it's looking for. And then the last one we talked about recently is, or previously, is security. Who can make this transition? For right now, this is pretty open. There's no restrictions, but if I wanted to limit this to, the administrator, I would only be allowing the administrator to make this transition if Eric logged in or a guest logged in. They wouldn't be able to make this transition from review into released. Once you've made all these edits, you want to make sure that you apply all of them. Something to keep in mind with security, when you're making changes to who can view files and you add and remove people from here, when you apply those changes, it needs to re-index the files. So depending on how many files you have inside a Vault, that could be a long time, that could be a short time. But what it will do is slow down your database searches while it's re-indexing. You'll get a message up top saying, hey, some of the files need to be re-indexed, searches might not. Sometimes they might not even come back complete. So my recommendation for that is if you're going to make any changes to these, make sure that it's close to end of day so that it kind of re-indexes overnight, or even towards the weekend so that it re-indexes over the weekend. May or may not have been burned by that a couple of times when I was working with a customer. All of a sudden, if you're in charge of the Vault and you slow it down, you get a lot of messages saying, hey, Vault, my search is very, very slow. And you try to figure out what did it, and you remember, oh, I made changes to the permissions inside of Lifecycles. So just keep that in mind. And I know we saw it inside of the category menu itself, but if you want to apply this lifecycle to certain categories, you can always do it from within the lifecycle. In this case, I only have it applied to engineering, but if I wanted to apply to standard or inside of items, if I wanted to apply it to parts and assemblies, I could do that as well. It's all based on what you want this workflow to apply to. That, in a nutshell, is Lifecycles. It's, like I said, it's a very big topic. We can go into a lot of different areas of it, and kind of tailor it specifically to what you need. Not to be confused with another Vault Professional tool, which is the ECO process. That one, on the other hand, is very rigid. It can only follow certain steps. Lifecycles, on the other hand, is very, very open. So with that said, I'm going to open it up for some Q&A. Any questions that you might have, go ahead and send them in, and we'll go ahead and answer them. I'll take a look here for one that might have come in. Are there any ways to send email notifications through lifecycle transitions? So out of the box, there is no way to send out an email notification. It has been something that has been requested before, but not added to Vault. It might be something we're working on our end to kind of get that going, but nothing solid at this point. But that's a good question. Email in ECOs is a thing. So whenever an ECO gets pushed through, certain groups get notified. It would be nice to have that inside of Lifecycles. Anything else coming through? And like I said, a lot of these things are very custom tailored to your environment. So if you have any questions about, specifically about your environment, go ahead and send in a ticket to support or send in a ticket to myself, and I'd be happy to jump on a call and get that going. But it looks like nothing. Oh, one last one before. Okay, I'll give Daniel a little bit time here to type in a question about items. And again, for those of you not familiar, while we wait for Daniel to type in his question, items inside of Vault, the way I like to explain them is think of them as a container for a specific part number. So it's the item master in here. So the number that gets given to each item is for that specific part number, and everything that's related to it gets kind of joined in and related to itself inside of Vault. So any drawings, PDF, support documentation, it all gets added to an item and related to this one part number. The other thing that happens is, where is it? Bill of materials. This one doesn't have it turned on. Let me see if I can find one that has it turned on. So the reason items get used is for their bill of materials tab. So whenever an item gets created with files inside of Vault, it'll go ahead and grab the bill of materials information from Inventor and create it inside of Vault. So that's one of the things that it's used for. But as far as Lifecycles themselves are concerned, they act pretty much the same way they would for files, except they apply it to items themselves, and then the items in turn apply it to the file. All right, so the question came in is, we use items to control our files and have recently upgraded to 2022. I have noticed as I have released multiple files once, since the update, that the items now try to create a new item for level of details that exists within the models. I want to turn this off as it causes issues when trying to create new items because of our lack of duplicate names. Okay, so I've released multiple files since items now try to create new items for any level of details that exist within the models. Huh, I don't think I've seen that before. Or I don't even think, let me see. It might be during the assign, and it might be like a item specific. Yeah, for level of details that should, I don't believe that's a. And then Anthony followed up with, items are required if you are using model states in 2022, correct? So both of these, I would have to actually go back and double check and make sure and kind of confirm the answer for those of you. Off the top of my head, I don't want to go ahead and give an answer that might end up causing grief for some people. But let me go ahead and get back to you, Daniel and Anthony. Make sure that, I'll go ahead and reach out through email and either set up a call and work on that together and go through that. It might even become a tech tip if we can figure out what's causing your issue there, Daniel. But I'll give it a couple more minutes. I'll go ahead and make sure note both of you here to reach out. And if there's no other questions, I'll go ahead and end the session here. We should be good. So. All right. Well, thanks so much, guys, for joining again. If you have any suggestions, or if you want us to keep following this trend of, adding more functionality to Vault and going through different workspace there. Okay, one last one before people start dropping off. Chris Marion asked, how difficult is it to use watermarking with a life cycle? So if you're using items, you can use watermarking on the drawings themselves. That would be an easy way to do that. You would tell it whenever it goes to certain states, you would add watermarking. Other than that, in file lifecycles, you won't be able to add the watermarking itself. So it's an item specific functionality, but you should be able to do it. But we do also have some tools that can apply that watermarking to files, but it'd be like an additional add-in kind of thing that we provide. But if you want to learn more about it, go ahead and reach out and we can talk about it. But through items, you should be able to add it. All right, guys. Thanks again for joining. I hope to hear from you guys, and I'll see you guys next time.